Okay, we're going to start now. It's 1 o'clock. Our live stream always begins on time. And just so you know, the digital clock up there is 8 minutes fast. So thank you all for coming to this event that we have. It's a book event, and the title of the book is called Colored Water, Dixie Through Egyptian Eyes. And the author is Dr. Ashraf El-Bayoumi. So, actually, I would also like to mention one other thing. What's very interesting and timely is that Dr. El-Bayoumi is also the father of Mona El-Bayoumi, whose wonderful paintings are in our gallery now for a couple of weeks. So you should come and stop by and take them in, and you can also look at some of them online. It's a family full of intellectuals and artists. So, and my name is Samira Al-Qasim. I'm the program manager here, for those of you who don't know. So anyway, Colored Water, Dixie Through Egyptian Eyes is set in the 1950s and tells the story of a young graduate student in chemistry who would become Dr. Ashraf El-Bayoumi. It begins just prior to his departure from Alexandria, Egypt, and ends after his arrival to Tallahassee, Florida, for postgraduate studies. The memoir offers uncommon and thought-provoking cross-cultural observations on segregation, the American dream, race, identity, science, sexuality, love, academia, religion, tradition, personal freedom, social status, and class during the 1950s. While written from the perspective of an Egyptian living in America for the first time, anyone who has found themselves immersed in an entirely new culture that's a different culture, can identify with the contrast between preconceived notions and actual experiences and impressions one has while away from the quote-unquote motherland and thrown into the quote-unquote unfamiliar. By the way, we're selling copies of this book afterwards, and Dr. El-Bayoumi will sign the book. So, his biography. Dr. Ashraf El-Bayoumi was born in Cairo, Egypt in 1934, now a retired professor of physical chemistry and biochemistry with a specialization in molecular spectroscopy and excited state dynamics. He studied conducted research and held teaching positions at Alexandria University in Egypt, Florida State University, MIT, University of Pennsylvania, Michigan State University, and University of California, Berkeley. Dr. El-Bayoumi is a frequent commentator on regional and international politics and social issues and is a co-founder of the Alexandria Human Rights Association. So please give him a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by thanking Dagmar, who organized this meeting, and Samira, who just introduced me, and Amr, my son, who was a driving force to write and publish that book and to promote it. Actually, that book is a culmination of sittings at dinner and talking about stories. And then Suhair, my wife, and I decided to write a list of these episodes, hoping to write them. It took some time because I get involved in a variety of issues that interrupted the process of reading. Before talking about the book, so I owe lots of gratitude to my family, all of them, and even my grandchildren, because they were not living at the time. The year 1934 was very rich with events. It witnessed the death of Madame Curie, the discoverer of radium and polonium, first woman to get 2 Nobel Prizes with difficulties. In fact, the French establishment never recognized her properly, and when they did, she refused the recognition. Women in science suffer a lot, and you may be shocked to know that many prestigious universities in this country admitted women the first time only recently. That year, Japan occupied Manchuria, Urey received the Nobel laureate for discovering deuterium, and who was born here that I mentioned here? Yeah, Sophia Loren was born. A tornado hit Japan that killed and wounded 8,000. And Saudi Arabia, Saudi army, occupied Gizan, which was part of Yemen, and like 3 other governorates, they occupied it. It's important to mention this in view of the criminal attacks of Saudi Arabia on Yemen daily, and the suffering that many countries are silent about. These many events are perhaps the reason camouflaged another event, because that's the year I was born. So it was overlooked. I don't remember events of my early years because the brain memory doesn't develop the first 3 years. It's unfortunate, but it's true. But the first thing I remember, and by the way, a group of scientists have discussed the first memory, and they decided that there is no relation with what you remember first and your life or your psychology. But I remember that event very clearly. My father carrying me on his shoulder in Alexandria, which was, that district was sand, now it is developed, and to see King Farouk riding his red Mercedes that Hitler gave him as a gift. The book, Colored Water, is not just a collection of episodes that some may find entertaining and even funny, but it is it's a cross-cultural experience. It's a self-examination process, not to Americans only, but vice versa. So the book goes back and forth to discuss things that are strange or interesting and relate similar situations in Egypt. By the way, it's amazing. The past 2 weeks, there are 3 books or 4 books reviewed by the New York Times and the Washington Post about the need of Americans to self-examine themselves. And I'm going to comment and in fact may read few lines of these reviews at the end of this talk. So you can read the book and enjoy it as a story, just like movies, but to read between the lines, the messages and the self-examination cross-culturally is one of the main goals of the book. Here I am in Alexandria, just graduated with first honors in chemistry. And I was dreaming of going to the United States not to receive my PhD, to be a scientist. There is a big difference. Many of my friends, Egyptians and others, whose goal was to get the PhD. Frankly, the PhD was taken for granted. But my goal was research and scientific inquiry. And I was helped in that by a great professor whom I dedicated the book, Michael Kasha. Michael Kasha is Ukrainian from a peasant family. His father, in fact, was adamantly against him going to the university. And he accepted going to the university, provided, after pressure from friends and so on, that he would go to be an electrician with his university. He became a great professor. He's a delightful man. He told me, Ashraf, you are not here to publish a paper or 2 papers with me. Here, you are here to be a potential professor and a scientist. And I remember when I got married a year later, Sohair was with me in the weekend in the lab, and he came and said, "What are you doing here? You're newly married. Get out of here. Enjoy your life." And that's contrary to my earlier professor, who was very different in that regard. I owe a lot to Michael Kasha. His lab was like a beehive of great scientists because he was very rich in terms of grants, because he was very famous at Florida State University. Lots of grants that enabled him to invite great scientists to spend several weeks and sometimes even months in the lab. Many of them are Nobel laureates, and I will talk about that in a little while. But I like now to just bring a taste of life in Alexandria at that time, because Alexandria of today is different, thanks to the Islamicists who gave it a very grayish taste. But I must say that things are beginning to improve. Yeah. When I say Islamicist, I'm speaking about a brand of Islam that reduces Islam to covering the hair of a woman or to a ritual here and there, and forgot the essence of all religions, of being kind to others, to be interested in your society, to be truthful, these universal values. But when you speak about universal values, sometimes here in America, people all the time in the media speak American values. What are the American values that are unique? What are they? What are American values indeed? And that was always in my mind, you know. And by the way, some of the reviews of the books that I told you about discuss this issue. Life in Alexandria was delightful. Here I am, fulfilled my dream of getting my bachelor degree, appointed as a graduate student. And a graduate student in our system means that you are on the tenure track. You are going to get a PhD and become a professor eventually. So it was a great time. And after finishing the undergraduate studies, I began a period of frivolous life, walking at the Corniche. The Corniche, of course, is the seaside boulevard, eating peanuts, roasted corn, alfalfa sprout, germinated beans, looking at beautiful women. They didn't have their hair covered at that time, and listening to songs. Even some of my friends used to sing them, like Kiss of Fire, Dance With Me, Ama Romeo of Rita Hayworth. My God, we were happy at that time. Alexandria at that time was very cosmopolitan. There were Greeks, Italians, of course Muslims, Christians, and Jews in Alexandria. The Italians, unfortunately, were deported by the British during the Second World War. But the imprint of the Italians in Alexandria is very vivid. The architecture in Alexandria is mainly Italian. Beautiful villas and so forth. And going to the movies in Alexandria was a delight. There were, of course, the big movie theaters. Before this business of having these small room theaters, these were fancy theater, one for Metro, Golden Mayer, the other for Universal, and so forth. And people used to go to the movies not casually, essentially well-dressed as if they are going to an opera. And it was a chance, again, during the entr'acte, to see beautiful women buying ice creams. And it was a delight indeed to watch the movies, and also the young women, of course. What are you laughing at, Nadia? Yeah. By the way, I'm 83 years now, and I still enjoy looking at beautiful women. Anybody who tell you otherwise is lying. And living at the sea is a special delight. You know, the sea is like a being with different moods. Sometimes calm, sometimes it is violent, and the waves would come and over the corniche. The colors varies from gray to bluish green, and depending on the interaction of the sun with the sea and the time. So the beauty of Alexandria also, I don't want to go deep into any subject because of time. The beauty of Alexandria is not physical only, especially when you grow older and you learn more about the great history of that city, long before even Alexander, who established the city, Alexandria. And the events, some of them are horrible events and some of them are great events that this city has witnessed. To mention the Fanar, which is a lighthouse, and the old library. It was a great time for scientists at the time, in ancient times, and great scientists lived in Alexandria. And also, Hypatia was living in Alexandria. And if you come and visit Alexandria, I will take you to the Roman amphitheater that was discovered later, maybe in the 60s. And there is a YouTube sort of amphitheater, only 3 steps, small YouTube thing that Hypatia will sit here and will talk philosophy and mathematics and so on. But the forces against science are old, including today. I mean, we have a president who is against science. There is an article in Sunday's New York Times to that effect. But Hypatia was considered sacrilege and was torn to pieces. Hypatia. So Alexandria has many interesting events. I lived with my family in a delightful section of Alexandria, Gleam, and the name is actually abbreviation of Glimounopolo. It is a Greek developer who developed that part of Alexandria. And in my other book, I dwell into various parts of Alexandria and their history. One of them is the famous San Stefano Hotel, which had a beautiful garden and theater. Unfortunately, the developer now transformed it into a cement block of modern buildings. Alexandria was called the Bride of the Mediterranean, but I invite you to read a bit about the history of Alexandria. And of course, in the West, people remember Cleopatra. Cleopatra needle, Cleopatra this, Cleopatra that. And that represents some kind of European centricity, because Cleopatra was Greek, Ptolemy. Nobody hear of Hatshepsut, nobody hear of Thutmose III, great developers, and Hatshepsut. She was a queen, but she had an artificial beard so that she will assert herself as a king. And she had a navy that used to have commercial activities with Ethiopia and the country called the Punt, which is Ethiopia and Somalia, and so on. In fact, the needle, the obelisk that's in New York, was in Alexandria, was bought, I think, transferred to New York. Now they call it Cleopatra needle. It has nothing to do with Cleopatra. It was built by Thutmose III more than 1,000 years before Cleopatra, but still people refer to it as Cleopatra's Needle. A personality that was very pivotal to my life, beside my parents, was my grandfather. My grandfather was especially bright man. He was jovial. He was kind of a philosopher. He was a joker. He was a charmer. And he was blind. He lost his eyesight when he was 16. And lucky for me, he came because he escaped the bombing of the Second World War in Cairo to live with us in the South at exactly the time I was learning how to read. And guess who began to be the reader? There is a movie called The Reader, but it's very different. It's sexy and stuff. But I became the reader of my grandfather. And it's not only reading. He corrects my pronunciation of Arabic. I ask him, what do you mean by the Axis forces? My grandfather, he explained the Germans and so forth and so on. So he was a school parallel to the other school till the end, till I came here to this country. Of course, he didn't understand English, but he used to stay very late when I was studying for my examinations. So I owed a great deal to this man, and he died many years ago, but his memory is vivid, and in fact, when I mention him, few tears come to my eye. We lived in a villa in Alexandria, owned by Swear's family. So the story, of course, in Egypt, we say Bint Geran, the daughter of the neighbors. Well, I never noticed her at first, but she was young. And when I noticed that, young women are funny, they suddenly they become females. And attracted my attention and became obsessed. And at a time when I was actually beginning to think of marriage. And I married her. And we lived together for 61 years so far. Yeah. But she was not my first love. My first love was a young girl in the kindergarten in Suhag, in the south of Egypt. A girl that I still remember her name. I don't know if she loved me. Her name is Zebeda. She had this lovely black hair and so on. She probably as old as I am now. I jump because you should read the book. So I arrived in the United States. I fulfilled my dream that I got a fellowship to study in the state. It was a great event for me when I learned that I was chosen to come to the United States to study PhD. Mind you, at that time, there were no missions abroad because of lack of hard currency and so forth, and the competition was severe. Anyway, we took a boat trip, which took almost a month to come, and there is the episode discussing what happened in that boat, including some hanky-panky. Yeah, was there. And in fact, I swear I smelled some funny smell, which I learned later that it was hashish, marijuana. But anyway, we stopped in various ports in Europe and Beirut, because the boat went eastward first. We arrived in New York, and I talk a little bit about my experience in Broadway and so on. I was with I wouldn't say friend, with a colleague who was older than me, 8 years older. He was actually my former teacher in the lab. And we took a train to go to Tallahassee, Florida. But we have to change a train in Jacksonville. So we took a train in Jacksonville. You must imagine the scene. Here I am dressed in a wool suit with a wool vest, tailored, because we are going abroad. And in Egypt, you are going abroad, it's a cold country. Most of the time, people at that time go to missions in Europe. So we are going to a cold country, we are wearing this, it's August, it's raining, we are carrying these heavy leather bags with books in them, sweating, but still, we are in a cold country. Anyway, we took the train of Jacksonville. My friend noticed that the carriage was dirty and all the people were black Americans. At that time, they don't call them black Americans. They call them Negroes if you are polite, and nigger if you are a racist. So I didn't notice, actually, but when he told me, I was very angry. And I said, I'm going to move to another carriage. He said, no, Ashraf, we are in a foreign country. We don't want to cause trouble and stuff. I said, no way. You want to follow me? Fine, but I will go. I went, and nothing happened, actually. We arrived in Tallahassee. Remember, Tallahassee, Florida, is the capital of Florida. I'm used to Miami from the movies. And I am used to parts in Florida like Orlando, where Esther Williams, the Sabihat al-Fatinat, swimming beauties, and Van Johnson, and so forth. And by the way, life in university as depicted in the movies at that time, wow, it's an exciting life. It is parties, young women, and all fun. And here we arrive at Tallahassee Station. Actually, it was not paved even. And even Sidi Gaber, which is the auxiliary station in Alexandria, is far more beautiful than it. So we stepped out of the train. We were terribly thirsty, carrying these heavy bags again. We saw something new. Fountains of water. So one of them was labeled colored and one of them was labeled white. My friend went to the white and I went to the colored. I told him, come on, Abdu, this is colored water. And I expected violet water or pink water or maybe greenish water. After all, we are in the wonderland. I forgot to mention to you that the American propaganda during the end of the war in Egypt used to to distribute fancy booklets with the title, America the Wonderland. And in the book says about fishing in somewhere in lakes, turning around and cook the fish in geysers, which are hot, and sit and eat it, and cows coming one end and bulu beef coming from the other end. It was just a psychedelic country of the wonderland. So I expected truly that the water will be colored, meaning red, green, blue. When I realized, because I looked at the station and saw colored and white repeated on restrooms and entrances and so on, I realized with my deepest, I won't say anger, it is sadness more than anger, that this is referring to human beings, black and white. So I entitled this episode as Colored Water. Well, I said to myself, well, the great Emerald City, if you watch Wizard of Oz, has some fantasies, but also has some bitter taste as well. Well, of course, we went to the university and we started our studies. It was a very exciting time for me. And also surprises. This Jewish friend, who was not a friend, I just met him, John Boardman, invited some Egyptians. We were 4 Egyptians at the time, and we were kind of treated as celebrities. By the way, Florida State University is lily white university. The only blacks are the janitors. And to make the picture complete, there was Florida A&M, which was referred to as the Negro College. and in the same city, but it was like a forbidden zone. And he invited us for a party. Well, the fact the party was new to me. I mean, some beer, I didn't drink at that time, and nuts and stuff. But I noticed many books that John Boardman had, these shelves which are supported by bricks. And I was talking to him. It turned out that John Boardman knew about Egypt more than I did. So that motivated me. I said, listen, I have to really read more about my own country. We're reading the Flambeau. The Flambeau is a local university newspaper, and we read suddenly that John Boardman was expelled from the university. What was his sin? He invited some Nigerian students who were attending Florida A&M, and the neighbors called the police. The police came, tore his furniture, threw everything. The next day, he was expelled. Not one whisper at the time. I mentioned this just to bring you into the scene that we, and the puzzlement that I was witnessing at the time. Here. I actually Googled John Boardman, and still he's alive. And apparently he is a progressive individual, and he's teaching physics in some poor locations in New York, So, by the way, this tells you something else, Even as early as that time, I never had any prejudices, religious prejudices, like Christians or Jews. Although I am vehemently against Israel and vehemently against Zionism, but I make a clear distinction between being a Jew and being a Zionist. There are, by the way, Muslims who are Zionists. Yeah, one of them called Anwar Sadat. Well, I lost one. Gigi, she had to go. I was about to say when you were born. Anyway, no, not now. Television. In Egypt, we didn't have television at the time. We relied completely on radio. And by the way, even movies, we heard on the radio. So surround the big radio, which has big bulbs and so on, to listen to the movies. Of course, to assist us to understand the movie, there is someone who's telling us, filling in some gaps. Like, for example, the thief now is climbing through the window, and then we hear a scream. And it's very interesting because listening to a movie at the radio, your imagination is more active, and each one listening has a different version, slightly different version of the movie. So television was a unique thing when I first arrived to the country. But what surprised me is that the gifts that they give in these television programs, and programs which are funded by a company that makes shoe polish. And I was wondering how come. Of course, by making a little arithmetic about the size of the market and how much profit, I understood that they can afford these lavish gifts. So I bought a radio and began to listen. I really was very much interested in learning about American society, interacting with American society, and even the politics. In fact, the first campaign I attended in Tallahassee was Kefauver and Adlai Stevenson, who were running against Eisenhower. Maybe many of the young people don't know who is Kefauver or Adlai Stevenson, but I was curious to learn and to enjoy what I can enjoy, activities in America. So I got the radio. And there was a song every morning I heard which made me depressed. It says, one morning I lost my baby. I thought I lost my mind. I said, what such a dreadful song. The guy lost a baby and they make it in the morning. So after long hesitation, I asked one of my friends, what's that? He said, no, that's not the baby. That is the baby. But by the way, I don't like till now referring to a lover as baby. I mean, it's very strange. But I heard some exciting songs. Do you know the first song in America, 45, that made $1 million? It was 16 Ton by Tennessee Ernie Ford. That song was written by someone who was fighting, a soldier who was fighting in the Pacific. And the words are very important. So I'm going to read some of the words. Some people say a man is made out of mud. A poor man's made out of muscle and blood, skin and bones, a mind that's weak and a back that's strong. You load 16 tons and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. And then he says, St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the country store. Well, that's what's happening now. How many of you have credit cards and owe money for the company store? This song, which is really against capitalism, and yet it made $1 million. That's very surprising and also positive. When I speak about songs in the United States, I speak also about songs in Egypt. Some of them are stupid and silly, like, for example, I would say it in Arabic, يا شبشب الهنا يا ريتني كنت أنا. And dreadful songs also says, الحب فيه إيه غير النوح. Love is nothing but weeping. And Farid Latrash says, الحب من غير أمل أسمى معاني الغرام. Love without hope is the epitome of love. But there are other songs sang by Kulthum. Fantastic poetry, fantastic music, and fantastic performance. And I will read just 3 lines. And any woman who would sing sincerely these words, I will fall immediately in love with her. This world is a book. You in it are the thought. This world is nights. You in it are life. This world is eyes. You in it are light. Are sight, I'm sorry. This world is sky. You in it are the moon. Wow. Kulthum is not a singer. She became a national figure. She embodied life in Egypt at critical times, especially after the defeat in '67 war. So there are silly songs, and there are fantastic songs. Of course, in Tallahassee, that was the time that rock and roll and stuff, and that's the time when Baptists banned dancing. I mean, they were banning dancing. And Catholics at the same time have to get a list of movies which it's okay to watch and have to eat fish on Friday or something. Okay. I'll jump to another episode. By the way, what time is it? Yeah. Huh? Okay. Well, we'll skip this. 10 minutes. Thank you very much. One of the scenes which struck me is Oral Roberts, the preacher. I watch television. I see a man sitting on a chair, and a man comes and he's blind or deaf, and he comes near his ear. Can you hear me? No. Can you hear me? No. And then, in the name of Jesus, I heal you. And he goes back. Can you hear me? He said, yes. Hallelujah. And the people jumping. My God. Hysteria in the name of religion. Hysteria. By the way, America is not unique in that, or Christianity is unique in that. However, televangelist is uniquely American. It's unbelievable. And then the story of Schwagert, who was adamantly against Penthouse, Penthouse, the pornography thing. And, the competition between these guys. So the guy hired a detective. I find that Schwager goes to 5 and 10 cent prostitute place. So he pictured him and so on. So he comes and weeping. I have sinned, but Jesus forgave me. And now it is your turn to forgive me. Well, the money dropped, but it will recover it later. And this it's always a funny cocktail. Religion, sex, money. And in Alexandria, this guy, his name is Breqa, had a group. It's the same cocktail. But he demanded from the women members to kiss him 21 kisses on the mouth. Well, he was arrested. Well, one word about the nanny of Gigi. Gigi was born in Tallahassee in 1959. Suhair was, 19 at the time, 18 at the time. By the way, we married very young. But in America in the 50s, people were marrying very young. And the American dream for white people was there. I remember companies, chemical companies, coming to the department to hire people where they are seniors. And they go and sign a contract, buy a house, and they have a car and so on. Now with a PhD, you can't find a job that easily. So life at that time, and I insist, for white Americans, most of them, of course, not all of them, because they were poor whites too, was really nice. Shanida is a nanny of Gigi. She's a black American woman, had a delightful face. She is heavy. And she taught me a lot about black American culture, about food, and mostly about black Muslims. Elaji Muhammad and so on. Malcolm X, by the way, was a member of that group. I met him actually in Boston years later before he became a regular Muslim. But anyway, the event that happened, that he used to give a ride to Shanida. My neighbors threatened me actually because she rides in the front seat. I tried to convince him that only important people sit kitty corner from the driver, but he wouldn't buy it. But I insisted in doing so. I was about to talk about the excitement of science, but I won't because there is something I have to read at the end. Excitement of science. Science is one of those things which like taboos in America and in Egypt too. Science, people have a formidable barrier to science. There are lots of things that one can learn about science and not being a scientist. And it is imperative to learn about science these days, from the products that we eat, the things we dress, and the gadgets we are using. There is no choice. And also people view scientists as a homogeneous group. They are not. There are bastard scientists, cheaters. One of them, by the way, is a Nobel laureate, James Watson. James Watson entered the lab where Rosalind, a woman scientist, was doing X-ray crystallography of DNA. She succeeded in, which is difficult, to produce a good crystal of DNA because it's a large molecule, it's difficult to, and she did the X-ray, and on her desk she has a note that is probably a helix. Comes in James Watson, and he copies it on his hand. You know, he got the Nobel Prize, and she got cancer. It's really unfair, you know. That reminds me also with another story. Lisa Meitner, a Jewish scientist in Germany, she succeeded in entering the lab to work with Otto Hahn with great difficulty, provided that she enters from the back door. Anyway, he helped her, Otto Hahn, to escape from Germany at the right time because she's Jewish. Otto Hahn was a chemist, and Lisa Meitner was a physicist. So he sends her a letter. He bombarded uranium with particles, and it broke the uranium nucleus and produced lighter elements. And he was puzzled. What is it? So she sent him a letter from her exile saying, Otto, you observed nuclear fission. He got the Nobel Prize. She got nothing. And in a letter after the war is ended, she begged him essentially to admit, at least for her own sake, what happened, and he wouldn't, even though he helped her to escape. Science is an exciting thing. When you discover science, it's like sexual climax multiplied by 10 or more. It's really amazing. I was at MIT when lasers were developed. It was a great time. And the paper, maybe Boston Globe, the headline said, a discovery searching for an application. Can you believe that lasers now, poor people in Egypt now know what lasers, not scientifically, but they know that they have to do a laser treatment for their detached retina. So never ask what's the application of a discovery. A discovery is important even if it doesn't have an application, because it's an inquiry for the truth and to understand what are we and what this universe is all about. Finally, I talked about reviews which had the same theme. One of them is by a woman. It's reviewed by Hisham Matar, and the author is Susan Hansen, and it's entitled Notes on a Foreign Country, and speak about the film. Speak about our blindness and subsequent discovery of all the people on whom empire had been constructed without our attention or concern. She asks why, given the extent to which America has shaped modern Middle East, the lives it ended, the countries it fractured, the demons it created, its fanatic and fanatical support of Israel, it did not feel no care to explore what that influence meant. I just ask you, what did the American gain in the Vietnam War? What? How many billions of dollars, for those who value money, being wasted? How many lives were destroyed? I mean, it is time for the American society to re-examine themselves, to re-examine words that they swallow like manifest destiny, like American values. And we are number one. Number one in what? If it is number one in helping others, if it is number one in science, fantastic. If it is number one taking care of the poor, fine. But that's not true. There is violence in America, and there are very negative, seriously negative things in this society. People would say, like some do, you hate America. Absolutely not. People who love another person, like a grandchild, are the ones who are critical of them and tell them when they are on the wrong path. You know, it is about time that America wakes up. It's very interesting that Trump, with all of his ills, may be doing something positive which he didn't plan to. He brings into focus discussion like that. It's not a coincidence that books like that come out. Let me tell you another book called Fantasyland. It's a fantasy land. Kurt Anderson, How America Went Haywire. Let me read a few lines and we'll end. National Delusion by Rosen. Reading Great Revision History of America is a bookish way to feel what it is like to be born again. Suddenly, past, present, and future are connected by a visible thread. Stray details and aberration start to make sense. You feel ashamed, but also enlightened, because at least you have named the sin. You belong to a nation of bloodthirsty colonizer, Howard Zinn said that, or anti-intellectual Richard Hofstadter. In Kurt Anderson's words, latest opus, a people who have committed themselves over the last half century to florid collective delusion. You know, I've been to Iraq working with the United Nations. I was retired then. And by the way, I witnessed the attack, cruise rocket attacking. I was there. My God, people are killed simply. For what? For what? What was achieved by destroying Iraq? What was achieved? What is being achieved in the terrorist attacks and those who support them, whether they are American or Saudi Arabia in Syria, trying to devastate the country because they said no. They said no to the dictates of America. That's why Bashar al-Assad is a criminal. He is a criminal because he said no to American dictates, nothing else. I like to say, I wish that when you read this book, if you read it, well, I am not preaching in that book, of course, or lecturing and so on, stories, but any intelligent person can sense the messages and the serious messages embedded in that book. Some delight, like life in Alexandria, some delight in the scientific establishment in the United States, and great people like John Boardman, for example, and many others like, you know, John Platt, a scientist and a philosopher, Michael Kasha, my professor, and also the negative thing, the disease called racism, the disease is called violence, the disease to control others. And I hope I relate some idea about the book and also to some extent some of my thoughts. And thank you again.
Stay here, we'll have some questions.
Definitely.
The microphone is going around.
Definitely.
And do you want to, who has a question?
Anyone who dares ask questions?
After this amazingly emotional, intelligent presentation. It's a fascinating book.
By the way, you mentioned some word which is very interesting, emotional. because, you know, when we talk about some political issues and we are people who are on the wrong side, we accuse us of being emotional, not you. And I would like to say that the brain, emotional component and logical component are dynamically linked. But one of the attacks, people, if you attack Zionism, Zionists will say you're emotional, you're myopic, and this and that. Nonsense. One has to be emotional. What's wrong with being emotional? Hi. Naheda.
Speak about it. With all your criticism of, rightfully so, of the system here in the U.S., the political
And the system in Egypt and the Arab world,
and across the Arab world,
particularly Saudi Arabia.
I wonder if there's any. I mean, I think of you as an optimist. I wonder if you see sort of the beam or a light, something.
Yes.
Can you explain that
Yes.
a little bit?
I am objectively optimistic. When the crisis started in Syria, I predicted publicly that the Syrian army will succeed in quelling the terrorists and the resistance. Why? It's not because of optimism. Because of conditions, minimal conditions, that were satisfied to achieve that goal. And yeah, I'm generally optimistic, but being emotionally optimistic only is not good. You have to study the situation. See, so you answer to your question. Situation in the Arab world is very negative. And one of the main contributors to its negativity, by the way, I distinguish between Saudi Arabian citizen and Saudi. By the way, it's ridiculous that a country called after a family, Saudi family. It's really ridiculous. But anyway, I make the distinction between people and their government. But one of the very negative things is what the Saudi Arabian government is doing. They created havoc in Egypt. The millions and millions of dollars that they spend building mosques and building associations and spreading the Wahhabi culture that reduces Islam to something trivial. If you believe that Islam is to fight for the truth, to defend the poor, to respect your neighbor, to respect other religions, and to do good to your society, that brand of Islam has nothing to do with it. To reduce a woman, my respect to people who cover their hair, that's their choice. But when it comes as a wave, if you look at Kulthum parties, none of the women were having, and they were behaving very modestly. Now the opposite. Many women have covered, I'm generalizing now, covering the hair, and their behavior is contradictory. That's why I told my grandson when he came, if you flirt, Ziad, concentrate on head-covered women. They are more sensual. Because their behavior, honestly, and he didn't believe me, and he thought that I'm joking, and he discovered that I was not. To reduce Islam to that level in order to fulfill political goals is unacceptable. So Egypt, it will take a generation at least to recover when it begins, and it has not begun. But no, in this country there are positive things, because you see, in Egypt in a worse situation, because that intellectual group that has sense has vanished. During Mubarak period have vanished. So some of them died, many of them died. But in this society, the big difference is that, of course, there are Trump people, but there is a segment of the society who are, I mean, who write these books? Who writes these, who gives lectures, who is writing editorials and critical and so on and so forth? Well, the fact that there is a need for these ideas to spread and to more Americans to have the courage to examine themselves, yes, but still there is an intellectual segment in this society who has some sense. In Egypt, the problem is that we have to create new such thing at all fields, in science and in politics, and maybe even sport. No, honestly. But you ask what is the bright thing? The bright thing is Syria. Syrians have faced big problems and big destruction. They have now the opportunity, because he resisted and obviously, although it's not complete, victorious, to build a new Arab project. And I'm writing about that.
I have a quick question. Could you address the situation that exists in universities now in comparison to that first experience that you had in Tallahassee? Today, there is so much controversy about what is the meaning of free speech within a university context, censorship, for example, situations like Dr. Salaita and people like that who, you know the story. And that there's a huge controversy about that now in terms of the way universities operate, in the way that they very much different, I suspect, than the sort of academic freedom that existed before. Would you be able to comment shortly on that?
Yes, in Florida State at that time, there was very little political awareness. And in fact, that's reflecting from the story of John Boardman. And there is another story actually involving a gay postdoctoral who actually frequented the same all-night cafe that I used to go. And he was arrested, but his professor, Hans Gaffron, a great scientist in photosynthesis, that's where he worked for, because she was a bacteriologist, insisted that he will not be fired from the university, otherwise he will take his group and go back to Chicago. So no, the comparison would be with Michigan State when I was a professor. I'm telling you, the political activities that we were involved in Michigan State, fighting apartheid, the peasants, the Mexican peasants, Chavez, black American integration and so forth, and movement against the Shah of Iran, Palestinian activities against Zionism. You know, Dagmar, none of these activities are possible these days. None of these activities are possible. If I give a speech, one of them that I gave in Michigan State, and I was very active, I will be arrested. So life in the universities has radically changed. But you see, America is becoming new liberal, and big issues are put in the back burner, except for the few that I mentioned. And the new generation, excuse me for saying, is a generalization. It's very selfish. It's a me generation. They don't care about other things. They don't care. This is a generalization, but it's an accurate one. So yes, America needs revival. And frankly, ironically, maybe Trump will help in this regard. Ironically.
Does anybody else have a question?
My granddaughter is not allowed to ask questions. No, I'm joking.
Okay, so you mentioned the role of the intellectual, and as Dagmar said, I think that there are a lot of existing problems within the quote-unquote intellectual community, especially in academia. So I don't see how the intellectuals themselves can be the leaders of some kind of true revolutionary movement, because if you look back in history, it was really the movements that succeeded ultimately were the ones that came from grassroots, bottom up. So how can the intellectuals be integrated within the struggle with the people so it's not a hierarchy of intellectuals versus the masses?
Intellectuals never cause revolution, but they are act as a catalyst. And your question is a difficult one to answer. I mean, it's a very difficult one to answer. How you can transmit these ideas and so on to a wider circle. But it happens. You know, one positive thing in this society is that a person who gives a lecture, like some of them died, but like Howard Zinn, you know, it's difficult to find a seat available. There are many people attend and many people think. Maybe they are a small fraction of the society, but that's the nature of things. And difficulties also in a society leads more people for self-examination. And that's why it's ironic, you know, when Trump brings the racism on the surface in its vulgar form, it may be useful. It's like a virus, it's like treating cancer where you have a virus which enhances the immune system. I mean, it's difficult. You know, change is difficult. Genuine change is almost impossible, but it happens. Thank you again. I hope I didn't.
No, thank you very much, Dr. El-Bayoumi. Thank you. And now we're going to sell your book in the other room,
Yeah,
so
wow,
please
that's
come on
nice.
by.